The Data Hot Seat. Hello, data friends. Welcome to the Data Hot Seat, the only podcast where we hydrate, caffeinate, and occasionally hallucinate, but only in the Gen AI sense. I'm Paul McComish, broadcasting from Advancing Analytics, where the coffee is strong, the opinions are stronger, and the dashboards are a work of art. Each week, I'll be looking at different topics around data and AI, and rather than just hear me talk about it, we'll be having a chat with some special guests that we put in the Data Hot Seat. Now, this is a new series, and as the dust has just settled after the Databricks Data AI Summit, we have had a chance to reflect. Today, we're going to be talking about that, and in future podcasts, we'll be looking at some of those announcements. So let's walk through the big themes. First off, the Lakehouse has got a serious upgrade. Databricks doubled down on the Lakehouse as the foundation for everything. But this year, they went a bit further than analytics. A Lakebase, their serverless Postgres offering, is generally available and growing faster than their data warehouse product. The interesting positioning here is LTAP, which is a Lake Transactional and Analytical Processing, which is Databricks saying that your lake should handle both your operational and your analytical workloads without needing separate systems. Then we have the Lakehouse RT, which is real-time performance directly on your Lakehouse tables, millisecond latency at scale, no copies, no specialist databases bolted on the side. And for those building pipelines, a Lakeflow Designer brings a visual, natural language authoring experience that opens pipeline creation up well beyond the data engineering team. We also had a look at the context and governance, which took center stage. This is where things got really interesting. Databricks framed the summit around three words: control, context, and choice, and the announcements back that up. Genie Ontology, powered by something they're calling OntoRank, is an automatic context layer that continuously learns how your business works and what your data actually means. Now, it's claiming about 84.5% first-time accuracy on real business questions, which is a significant jump on any sort of general-purpose coding agents. Unity AI Gateway extends governance beyond data and into the runtime interactions of every model, agent, and MCP tool in your estate, including hard spend caps that don't just alert you when a budget is hit, but they also stop those requests. Then we have the big one, which is Omnigent. It's their open source meta harness for orchestrating across agent frameworks like LangGraph, Crew AI, Claude Code, OpenAgent, SDK, all from one layer. And open sharing is now donated to the Linux Foundation, which gives organizations a vendor-neutral way to share those AI assets across platforms without any vendor lock-in. Genie also became a family. The Genie is well and truly out of the bottle now. What was once a single product is now a full suite. Genie One positions itself as a data-smart AI coworker, showing up in Slack, Teams, iOS, and Android, taking actions, scheduling tasks, and writing back to ecosystems. Genie Code handles the developer experience, and Genie Agents evolve your existing Genie spaces into autonomous multi-step agents. And then we have Genie Zero Ops, which is one of my favorite. It's an autonomous background agent that monitors your production pipelines and models, detects issues, diagnoses root causes, and proposes sandbox verified fixes before you even know that something is broken. And then the platform keeps expanding. Databricks Apps is maturing as the way to deploy agentic applications directly on the platform. They announced Customer Lake, which brings an agentic, customer-driven platform natively into Databricks, and then LakeWatch gives you a Lakehouse native SIEM, pulling agent traces, alerts, and audit data into a single security layer. Now, that's quite a lot, and whilst not all of it is generally available today, some of these announcements are in preview or they're coming very soon. But the direction is unmistakable. Databricks is building a platform where agents are first-class citizens alongside your data, governed, observable, and ready for the enterprise. Now, to help us make more sense of it all, I'm joined today by the CEO of Advancing Analytics, Terry McCann, who was on the ground in San Francisco all week. We're going to dig into what this all means, what's real, and what you should actually be paying attention to. So let's get into it. Okay, welcome, Terry, to the Data Hot Seat. For those of you who don't know who you are and what you do, who are you and what do you do?
Hello, everybody. My name is Terry. So I'm the CEO of Advancing Analytics. What do I do is an interesting one. I think if I look at what I tried to do, I tried to help bring to life the solutions that we build for customers in terms of how do I help customers really realize the value of the investments that they're making in data. So I spent a lot of my time with the executives and our customers. So that might be somebody who, is a group head of claims in an insurer. It might be somebody running capital markets for a bank, and really helping them think about how do they kind of understand what it is that data can actually do for them, both data and AI, and then really bring that to life in their organizations. And a second to that, right, spend a whole load of time, focused on growing, advancing analytics and, slowly taking over the world one step at a time.
And one country at a time as well.
Absolutely.
So we were talking about the Databricks Summit. So because that was only the other day, we're just going to focus a lot on that. You were in San Francisco, of course. Other than the Advancing Analytics karaoke, what was the moment that told you this year felt a bit different to other years?
Yeah, I think this year, I think if I look at this year, I think it is kind of dominated by scale and pace. And so, we're trying to work out. So normally I was disappointed didn't do it this year. Normally they, next to all of the badges, they have a thing called the Flare Station, right? Which is where you can cover your badge in various different stickers. And each year, in previous years, they've done this is my nth, summit. And I was trying to work out like, how many summits have I been to? And I think this year would have been my 8th summit. So going all the way back to, when we used to go to the Spark summits before they became the data summits, before they became data and AI, right? And when I look at the kind of period that we've gone through from that very first one that I went to, which was back in Amsterdam, to, where we are this year, and we've been to everyone in between, I think this year was just massively dominated by the scale. So this year, I think in person, we had somewhere, I can't remember what the actual numbers were, somewhere between 30 and 35,000 people in person in San Francisco.
Huge, right? Massive.
Which is utterly intense when you look at the small amount of square footage that you actually put 30,000 people into. It is, it was fairly apparent when you just tried to get anywhere that it was so busy. But it's great, right? It's great to kind of see the buzz around it. It's great to see that everybody is there. And so I think, scale, not only scale in the number of people, but you slowly look at the way that Databricks are having to take over the hotel down the road and the hotel next door, right? Because they're just running out of space inside the Moscone, which always blows my mind how Salesforce run that event with 200,000 people. Like we've got 30,000 people in that place and it feels really busy. Trying to do that with 200,000 seems utterly bonkers. But
standing room only, of course. It's huge, but it's just such a huge impact. Just the amount of people that are interested in data and AI, and everybody chatting to all sorts of other people they've never seen before. It's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think scale is definitely one part of it. I think pace is the other. And I think if you look in previous years, there would be every year there's a ton of announcements, right? But every year when we look at the number of announcements, I remember we used to prepare a blog for every single announcement that came out, and we could do that pretty easily. And then this year, there's 30, right? The pace of change is just astronomical at the moment. And I think, partly that is, competing with the market. There's a lot of change going on. There's a lot of competition coming in. We saw the Snowflake Summit 2 weeks before the Databricks Summit, right? Load of huge announcements there, load of positive sales results, that indicated a really, good boost in their share price and things like this, right? There's a ton of competition, but not only from, companies like Snowflake and from BigQuery and other areas, but also in a lot of the other kind of analytical platforms around it. There's a huge amount of competition. And so, Databricks are definitely probably feeling that pressure. And that was massively reflected, I think, in a lot of the announcements that came out. The pace was just huge. And also, I think what's different is a lot of those announcements that were coming out, a lot of them, still there's a ton that are going to be in beta or in kind of private preview. But a lot of them are they're pretty much available now, right? So it isn't the case that we're announcing these things and you're going to see them in 6 to 9 months' time. A lot of it was this stuff's been announced and it's pretty much there for you to start kind of playing with, and or here's 6 examples, right, of where we've been running it with a live customer now. And that stuff, again, is just a very different approach, right, to previous years, where it's like, this is what we're building. And you can probably tell, like, is that thing really, really real today, right? How much of that demo is smoke and mirrors? But the stuff coming out of Summit this year, right, most of it is pretty much ready to roll.
It's all exciting stuff. It's quite good as well. It gives you an idea of where Databricks are thinking and the sort of the direction they're heading to, and what sort of things they see as the future. And
yeah, for sure.
Certainly lots of AI. Obviously it's the Data and AI Summit. So
absolutely, right. I mean, it kind of has to be, right? I mean, it really is, I think the difficulty probably that Databricks have is, for the last couple of years, they have been the sexiest company in the world. They've been the company that everybody wants to work for. And then in the last 6 months, they're probably the third sexiest company in the world after Anthropic, after, OpenAI and Cursor and various other places, right? And that is partly because, and I would say prior to Summit, at least, it was about, their vision in terms of the way that they're taking their platform and their products. And now I think if you look at post-Summit, I think you can see that there's a much bigger completeness of vision, especially against a lot of the other platforms. But I also think the interesting thing is, even if, Anthropic or OpenAI are doing incredibly well from their side of things, you can't really win with either of those platforms without having a solid data platform as well. So you can't really have an Anthropic story without a Databricks story, or an OpenAI story without a Databricks story, right?
And I just want to pick up on the one word you said in amongst all of that, and that was sexy. When I started my data career, the word sexy never featured. So everybody out there who's working on Databricks, you're working on the sexy platform.
Damn right. Well, I've always had it right. DJ Patil, was famous for quoting that data science was the sexiest job, right, in data. The sexiest job of the 21st century, I think, is what he originally said when, many, many years ago. So I've always been in the sexy part of things, right? And it's just now all you data nerds are catching up to us sexy scientists.
Absolutely. Right. We've been talking a lot about announcements. So if you had to list your top 3, what would they be and why?
Yeah. Again, that's hard, right? It's really hard this year to kind of narrow it down. And I'll probably tackle things from a slightly different perspective, I think, maybe to a lot of technical people probably that you'll talk to. And the way that I always look at it is like, what is actually going to drive real value for people? And, what is going to make the lives of our customers easier? What is going to make the platform more cost effective? And what is going to ultimately simplify, I think, the lives of the developers and the lives of the teams and the lives of the businesses, right, that we kind of work with. And so when I think about it, my top 3, I had to really rag my brains around this, are definitely Genie Ontology has to be one of them. And I don't know if these fit in order, right? I'm not going to say 1, 2, or 3 because I kind of think that they all work for different ways, right? Genie Ontology has to be up there. The Lakehouse /RT, or the Raiden engine, or the real-time engine around Lakehouse, definitely has to be up there. I think those 2 are probably two of the most important announcements of the whole week. And then thirdly, for me, is also Customer Lake. And I also think that that's a very interesting, maybe not for the way that Databricks are trying to potentially market and go to market with it, but I think in terms of some of the other ways, other things that sit around it, I think that's a really interesting and important announcement. Those are my top 3.
So we were talking about Lakehouse RT or Raiden, and that kind of ties in nicely to that Customer Lake and getting your processing, getting your data faster. So Lakehouse RT would start to give that faster sort of real-time view of the data. So that, to me, that one seems quite exciting. So how do you see that evolving in terms of customers who might have a Lakehouse at the moment and are doing sort of regular batch process? They might have like a daily dashboard that refreshes. How would you see Lakehouse RT influencing how they evolve their platform for the future?
Yes. How do we simplify what somebody needs to actually do, right? Because if I look at most of the customers we work with, they follow a similar pattern, right? I won't say traditional, right? But for a lot of the analytics that they're running, they have Databricks there, and Databricks is doing a huge amount of the heavy lifting there. But for particular use cases, they also have another platform, right? And that might be, Elasticsearch, that might be Redis, that might be ClickHouse, that might be Apache Pinot, something like that, right? That is a super high scale optimized engine for serving data out very, very quickly. And the pattern tends to be, we'll take data from our source systems, we'll load that into Lakehouse, we will put that into Databricks, and then we'll shape that and we'll push it out into something like Elastic, right? To cover off those really high throughput telemetry stuff, real-time dashboards that sit, that aren't like a AI, BI, a Power BI, right? But something that's embedded into an application or wallboard or something that needs to be like super, super, super fast, right? Now, what Lakehouse RT is really trying to do is to try to say, well, actually, let's simplify this again, right? Let's remove the need to have Databricks and Elastic or Databricks and ClickHouse and just say, well, realistically, you can run this now under one engine. And so we'll say, well, actually, you'll take that from your source systems, you'll go Lakehouse, you'll go Databricks, and then you'll just serve that right straight out of Databricks. So again, it's about simplifying that ecosystem to just be like, well, we have the data in Databricks already. Why are we pushing that out to something else? Why don't we just serve that? And I think that, that new, like the Raiden engine, the new kind of paradigm in terms of, really taking advantage of Photon, not having to, not having to have a database, right? It kind of pulls into the question. I remember years and years ago, like Microsoft pushed out a ton of marketing, which was like, I think it was around when Cosmos went live, like, why do you even need a database anymore? And everyone went, absolutely lost their minds over it. But, there's an argument here, which is, well, when you have everything stored, everything is in Delta, everything's in Unity, everything's kind of running that way and then serving out that way, to what extent do you need a physical database serving this or a cache or anything else, right? When you can run that all through RT. I think that presents a simplification and a much easier sell than something like Lakebase and the Neon stuff. This gives you an immediate compete where you can kind of take out a huge cost center that might be, ClickHouse or something else, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it saves, I've seen this many times. I've even seen people copying back into a SQL server from the Lakehouse just to serve out something which they might want a bit faster. There's crazy stuff going on. So just eliminating some of that infrastructure and just bringing it all in, and a single copy of the data as well. One of the biggest troubles that I've seen is where you have multiple versions of the truth. And depending on when you query one at any one point in time, you might get a different answer. So it helps eliminate that. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other thing we also have to realize though, and again, we ran a webinar the other day and somebody asked the question, right? There are so many announcements. Like, how do you think about, where do you focus? What should we be looking at? And, does every single customer have a problem that Lakehouse RT solves? Like, no, right? It is, unless you are already putting stuff into Redis or you are looking at, serving data really, really fast. I think as AI models get better and better, and as things like Genie 1 want better and faster access to the data that we have, it'll become a bigger and bigger requirement. But right now, I think it is a really interesting option to simplify what people are doing. But it may not be the case that, on day one, every single Databricks customer is going to rush out to be like, okay, how do I spin up an even faster version? Because yes, you can do things faster, right? But I think you also have to question, do you need to? And if you're not having to say, well, I need to put this data in Elastic or Redis or ClickHouse, then realistically, you will probably be fine still serving that directly from Databricks or something similar, rather than, rushing to Lakehouse RT. But I think, again, as things get faster, as the need gets there, I think the interesting thing about Databricks is that they are, if I look at kind of completeness of vision or, appetite to be there sooner, they're the ones who are there first, right? And so as this becomes a bigger and bigger thing, then Lakehouse RT, I think, will become a bigger and bigger thing for a lot of customers.
Exactly. Okay. The tagline this year, we saw an awful lot of on all the keynotes: control, context, and choice. If you had to add a fourth word to that framework, and it could be cost, what would it be and why?
Yeah, I'm going to sound like a broken record, right? But I'm going to stick on your C's, right? I'm going to add another C, which is completeness, I think, right? I think if you look at everything we're trying to do with RT, with Customer Lake, with Lake Watch, with, Neon or, Lake Base, right? It is this kind of idea that what we're trying to do is we're trying to shift away from Databricks being this unified data platform, that you're using to service traditional analytics, reporting and things like this, right? And a lot of kind of backbone systems now to the kind of system which is the data ecosystem, right? So it's not about being a product to serve a particular purpose. It's about having a tool or having a workbench of different products that you pull in for different reasons. And so I think what we're seeing and where I think Databricks are really edging in their competitiveness is, do you need to have a separate product for that and for that and for that? And the way that I always think about it is, do you know what? You probably could go and get a separate product for that. And it's a little bit like, bit like thinking about Python, right? Like Python is always the second best language for doing anything. There is always a language which is better and more optimized for doing that particular task. But Python is phenomenal and it's the second best, right? And if you just want to learn one thing, just learn one thing and you can pretty much do everything. And Databricks is going to be, for these pieces that are ancillary to it, it's a bit like that, right? Like you could go and buy for Customer Lake, you could go and buy, Ampirity or High Touch or something like that. And realistically, you would probably get a much better product. But do you need to? And I think that's the completeness part of it. Or, with Lakewatch, do you need to go and get Splunk or something similar, right? No, in theory, you might not need to, right? You can go and get Lakewatch or something else to, roll out that kind of completeness of the picture. And I think that's what, is really interesting. I think more and more so, we'll see a lot more of these things coming in of how we can look at, where are people having to buy different products for different scenarios? And we bring that all back into one place that you can use if you want to, but if you don't want to, it's there as an option, right? And if you're paying for one thing and you're paying for another thing and you're paying for another thing, you're no doubt just wasting time. You're wasting compute. You're wasting AI credits, right? Why not just pull that all into one singular place and have that kind of completeness of vision? So completeness.
And I think that ties into the Databricks vision. I remember when they rebranded to the data intelligence platform, we were just spouting Databricks all the time. And then it's like, oh, it's now something more than just data and AI. It is a complete platform. And it certainly is the route that everyone's looking to go. So it's going to be really, really exciting to see what they come up with next. Because some of the things, I've looked at things like Lakewatch and think, I didn't even know that was a problem. I just assumed there were some amazing security things out there that just handled all this stuff. So to actually realize, it's a data processing thing. It's a data analytics thing. There's some AI and machine learning and all sorts of bits and pieces in here that actually is broken up into lots of different bits. So having that all in one place, having it secure and monitoring your security at the same time, it's just inspirational.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff, right? No, absolutely right. And I also think for a lot of people, it also kind of lowers the bar for a lot of this stuff, right? Like, like you say, like getting into SIEM and getting into security monitoring and stuff like that typically does require a very high bar in terms of being able to, know what you're looking for and pull all the right data in. And I think bringing that all in, bring that into a platform, not only kind of makes it easier for people who are already in the kind of Databricks ecosystem to take advantage of some of those skills, but it also, simplifies a business's cost center because ultimately, do you like, I always recommend you have security experts, right? But for a lot of the general day-to-day, the querying, the access permissions and what, the kind of who has what access and what kind of stuff has been going on, you can give that off to somebody who really deeply understands the Databricks platform now, right? And so you're simplifying your business model from a technology perspective, from a skills that you need to hire and that you need to pay for, bringing that all together, you don't need to go and have a load of people who deeply understand Splunk. You can have a load of people that deeply understand security and Databricks, and then, being incredibly powerful.
This is where I see a lot happening across not only like the security layers, but also like data engineering or data analytics as a whole. You've got people who know what they want to get. They know what they want to do. And we're simplifying the tools to enable them to get it there faster. I mean, our example of Pantheon and Lakeforge is a good example of that. Just whereby we know we want to get this data. We know we want to get it processed. Yes, we've all got the skills. Yes, we can write lots of Python or SQL or, dare I say it, Scala to do all this stuff for us. But if we got a tool, we've got an AI agent that can help us do it, why do we want to focus on doing the coding when actually we can be a lot more creative and get to the answers faster? And actually, it's more enjoyable. You get to do more creative things. So it's interesting how everything is going along that same sort of route.
Yeah, damn right. I mean, it's fun as well, right? I think it's we're typically limited by time more than we are of anything, right? And we know like there's a significant amount of grunt work required in every new platform build out, where we need to just be like, well, we know that we have 30 sources that we need to take data from. It's a lot of move table from A to table into B, right? And it's a lot of repetitive work, and it takes time, and it's, sometimes it's interesting and sometimes it's dull. And, you're exactly right? With things like, Lakeforge and Pantheon, and thinking about how we abstract away from that. And as you say, like, just be more creative and kind of automate as much of the grunt work as possible so that we can do the things that are really valuable, which is, well, how do we actually realize value from this data, as opposed to just taking data in and, looking at it and being like, well, we could probably make some analytics work like this. It's more the case like, we have all your data now, and let's really understand your business processes. Let's understand how your business functions, to then be able to be like, okay, well, this is what we should do. And this is how we should shape, your kind of model. And I think that's really interesting as well when you look at things like Genie ontology then on top of this. So once we have all the data in and we have that understanding, as that kind of level then on top of this, so then, gives that much more deeper context and business understanding. So I think all of these things, as they start coming together, build out that bigger and bigger kind of, again, completeness of the vision.
So let's just follow up on that a bit. We mentioned context, and obviously we mentioned context earlier as well. So it received an awful lot of focus, particularly with that Genie ontology announcement. So let's just look at that in detail. How significant is that to data teams?
Yeah, I think it's the part like, so we've spoken for years about this evolution of the way that people consume analytics, right? And, for a long time, I mean, I've kidded myself for years about this, right? Like, working in data for the last 20 years, we always expect this idea that we build platforms, like it's like, we build it and they will come, right? And it never really happens. Or this idea, like we always had this context of, well, we build things for the super user, right? The super user who, will look at a dashboard, consume everything, and kind of make the right choices and the right kind of analytical outputs. But in reality, right, we spent a huge amount of time building, big analytical systems, big data warehouses, complex beasts, and then we put dashboards and various things in front of them, assuming that people will just understand what they're looking at, right, and understand what it means. And yes, a super user and somebody like that absolutely does, right? They get in and they get stuck in. But you typically find, it took me a long time to learn this, right, that maybe super users in your business are less than 3% of the people, right? If you work in a very big organization, that's going to be like 1%, right, of people who can really action what is there. And the other thing is, like, we are so, as data professionals, we are so tightly embedded in understanding, analytics. But nowadays, right, I look at some of the dashboards that my team build, right, and I'm like, what on earth is this actually trying to show me, right? The level of understanding required to kind of process a dashboard or process a report is actually quite high, because there's a huge amount of understanding that has to go into every single thing that you see on that page, right? And it isn't just a case of being able to visualize it in the right way. We need to know, when we talk about margin, what do we actually mean, right? What is the business definition of margin? What is this definition of margin in this particular business unit? What is the definition of margin as I look at that metric on this page, right? And then again, in the context of what business unit I'm looking at, in terms of what, product I'm looking at, there are so many different factors that have to go in to not only understanding how to visually understand something, but how, what are the actual semantics that go behind that? Then also, is it even actually calculated correctly, right? Using the right terminology and the right kind of way that we think about margin as a business. And so this is where the concept of something like ontology really comes into play, because we've spent years and years and years building governance platforms, right, to try to make it so it's easier and easier and easier for a business user to understand the context of the data that we have. Now, we talk a lot about governance, right? And a lot of the times we're building governance today, like it isn't for you, the person understanding a dashboard anymore, right? It's for the agent trying to interpret it. And now the difficulty is that you get a whole adage, right, of crap in, crap out, right, when it comes to building anything. And so we're always stuck in this idea, like we need to build good curated governance to make sure that we have the ability to be able to serve our data in the best way. And now as that kind of analytical processing is shifting away a little bit from the kind of traditional dashboards to a more conversational intelligence kind of interface, things like Genie, right? Obviously the proliferation of Claude and everything else, right? As we've shifted towards that as a kind of different paradigm in the way that people are conversing with data, we also need to make sure that when they're asking questions, that they're asking questions in the right way, and that we're also serving the results in the best way possible, right? And so this is where we've spent a huge amount of time building out, Unity Catalog to make sure that it understands the concepts that we mean so that we can do that better for Genie. But it still only ever answers like part of the problem, because then it understands, well, what does margin mean, right? But it doesn't really understand margin in the bigger term of what is happening in the business, what is happening in the industry that you work in, what is happening in terms of, current internal political turmoil in your business, right? Those pieces, well, exactly. Those pieces get missed, right? But they add, it's where we'd send out a dashboard to somebody, 10 years ago, and someone would annotate it and be like, well, this thing is down, obviously, because, we've had this stuff, we've had 5 UK prime ministers in the last 5 years or whatever, right? And that's had an impact on our, dollar to pound and everything else, right? And so you can explain it away, but it requires somebody to explain it away. And so I think, where Genie ontology kind of comes in is, if I think about the way that the Lakehouse paradigm was designed to basically unify all of your data, right, and bring everything together, unify that and present that back into a way that anybody could kind of get access to. If I look at the way that Genie ontology is trying to position itself, it's like, how do we do something similar, but for all of your business context? So how do we have the unified business context platform that then works on top of the unified data platform? So serving the ideas of, when you talk about margin, it's margin in terms of, okay, well, this is the business, right? Taking data from all over the business. So not only the data that is, available in the Lakehouse, but documents that you have on Confluence, external sources, all of this stuff basically together, build out that more context aware picture of what it is that we're doing and why that is really important. And so I think it's an interesting one as well, because if you look at where Databricks are positioning Genie ontology in comparison to, say, Snowflake's Horizon Context and stuff like that, they're both kind of charging towards the same goal, but going at it in slightly different ways. And I think when you look again at like Databricks' vision compared to Snowflake's vision, like Databricks' vision around ontology with Genie is so much more complete than what Snowflake's is today. And a part of me looks at it like, we often talk a lot about, well, when will Databricks IPO, right? And I think today it's a really interesting time to be a private company and not to be a public company, right? Because you can move fast, you can break things, you can do the stuff that needs to be done without worrying about share price and stakeholders and shareholders and everything else, right? You can do these big things and see how the market responds. And I think with ontology, the market's responding incredibly positively. So it's definitely definitely one of the key announcements.
Definitely one to watch to see how these things evolve as well, because you always find when they bring out something new and it will expand it into something that you weren't necessarily expecting. So it's quite fascinating from that point of view.
Yeah, absolutely right. I think if you like, I've always loved if I look at, where I've been successful over my career, I wouldn't always say that I was the best implementer of things that we build, right? I've always been so deeply passionate about the academic side of what we do. And I think when you really think about the way that ontology or Genie ontology is being applied here, the academic side of it in terms of bringing all these pieces kind of together is really interesting. And as you say, right, the implementation side of it will continue to grow over kind of the next 12 months and then most likely over the next kind of 24 months as we see it kind of interact with stuff like Genie 1, offering a very similar Claude type, interface on top of what you're doing and making all of that better, that conversational intelligence and that awareness, right? I think we're going to have a lot of fun over the next 12 months.
Okay, so with everything announced this week, obviously we've Genie 1, Genie Ontology, Lakehouse RT, Unity AI Gateway, all those sorts of things. If someone came to you and said, hey, we're evaluating Databricks for the first time, where do we start? What would you tell them?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, right? Because it's one that we get pretty much every single day. And I always think it's really easy to chase the shiny things, right? To chase down Lakehouse RT, to
shiny toolitis.
Absolutely, right. To be like, well, Genie ontology is the thing that you absolutely need. A lot of times it is like, well, what are we actually trying to solve, right? What is the problem that we're actually trying to really solve it in this business, right? And if it's the case, because some of the times a platform like Databricks will be appropriate for all of the things they're trying to do. And sometimes it won't be appropriate at all, right? And we need to look at something else. And so I would always trying to understand, okay, well, what are the actual drivers of what we're trying to do, right? Are we trying to be, really competitive? Are we trying to break some annoying internal tendency where we can't grow our business without growing our employees, right? Are we trying to, move into a new market? What are we trying to do? Like, how are we trying to differentiate? And what is it that we're really trying to solve so that we can then think about, okay, well, how do we position the right kind of solution to solve that problem? And it may well be, right, that we as a business have this incredible, platform where we're serving data out super, super fast. Maybe we're a video game company and we're serving data out to our players, right? But it is costing us an extraordinary amount of money because we've been running it in this legacy tech, right? And we want to do it in a much better way that's more cost effective and more aligned, right? Well, maybe actually like something like Lakehouse RT would be super appropriate, right? But then also it's about, it's all of these different factors that we always have to kind of evaluate. And we often talk about, the 3 Ps or maybe the 4th P of, people, process and platform, right? Which is, the platform might be the obvious choice, but do the people have the skills to kind of run it? Do we have the team to do it? Do we have the processes around it? And then the last one is always the politics, right? It's the political capital. Like, do we want to be doing this, for any number of internal reasons that, prevent platforms from ever going live? Typically tend to be people and politics more than they ever do, around platform. And so it would always be a case of, whilst these things are really interesting, everybody is talking about them. We do really need to ground ourselves to be like, is this going to offer an immediate value to what I am doing? And if that is it going to save me money? Is it going to make me money? Is it going to keep me out of jail? Like, what are we actually trying to do with that? And then try to understand, is Databricks the right thing to go for? Is something else better? Hopefully not. But what is the right thing that you need to solve the problem that you have around all of those things? So I would always avoid chasing the new things and, make a platform choice just based on Genie ontology or something like that. I would want to understand the whole kind of holistics of what we're trying to solve.
Exactly that. It's a perfect way to say it. On a lighter note, you've sat through keynotes, you've sat through demos, sessions, probably a few late nights in San Francisco. Mentioned the karaoke. So from the conversations you've had with everyone and the buzz between all the sessions, what did that tell you that the official announcements didn't? Other than, of course, what the football scores were.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I always love about Summit, or love about events in general, right, is it's all the things that happen in the hallways, right? It's not necessarily about, it's great to go to a session, it's great to go to keynotes, it's great to hear from, really influential people in our industry. But it's almost more interesting to have those kind of conversations in the hallways to be like, well, what were you interested in? What does that mean in terms of your business? What are you thinking about? And all of that, those sorts of stuff. So I always think those kind of, intermediate ones are really interesting, getting people's multiple perspectives around, well, what does ontology mean for them? What does, will you ever use something like Omnigent and these sorts of stuff, right? It's all of those little kind of side conversations, I think are really, are the most interesting stuff to have, right? We obviously have a booth at the conference every single year, but even then you get a different conversation on the booth to what you do to just kind of casually having a coffee with somebody or having a drink with somebody and really understanding, what is motivating them, in terms of the announcements, and also what is motivating them to be at the event, right? And, typically, unless you're just kind of sent by your company, right, there's generally a reason why somebody wants to go, something they want to learn, something they want to try and take away from it. And I think, the most impactful pieces for me always being at the event is those conversations that you have, the people that you meet, the people that you meet from all over the world that you would have realistically no opportunity to meet outside of this kind of ecosystem. It's those things, right, that are really great. The new relationships you build and those things. Like, I think those are really the most impactful things that I always take away from Summit for sure.
I'd agree with that. Just from when I was there last year, it was just meeting lots of people who were just randomly saying hello to other people in the corridor because they were so well known. It's like, I've just met you and you're just happily talking to me about what these announcements are. And everybody has a different feeling, a different view. Yeah, that one in particular solves that problem for me. Or somebody else go, actually, this one is really important to me because of X, Y, and Z. And you go, oh, I didn't think of it like that. So it is fascinating to have those conversations and just see things, both inside whatever industry you're working in, but outside in lots of different ways of looking at things like Databricks RT or Genie Zero Ops, which is one of the ones I picked up on. And it's just like, yeah, that would solve so many problems for this particular reason. Love it. It just makes going to these conferences worthwhile rather than just sitting through keynotes and then going down the pub afterwards or the bar or whatever it is in San Francisco.
Well, it's a wine tour in Napa Valley, right? That's what you do afterwards.
And the karaoke.
and the karaoke, right? I mean, to sing your heart out at Chainsmokers this year and then follow it up with a karaoke session, right? Again, it's always about like work hard, play hard, right? At these events, right? I think everyone deserves to have a good time alongside, learning a lot or learn a lot and then ruin it all by, going and singing at karaoke.
Absolutely. I'm going to finish this off with one last question then. And what's the one thing that you're telling the team to go and explore?
That's a tough one, right? Because there's so many different things. I always think when it looks at what to go and explore, it very, very much depends, right, on. So it isn't a blanket, right? Go and look at, building apps, with all the stuff with Genie code and things like that. It is more for me about look at the customer that you're working with, look at the industry that they are in, and really think hard about what are some of the announcements that we can bring back to a customer. So say, a banking customer, what is it that's going to be really impactful for them as opposed to, again, just kind of going for something. So Genie Ontology is an easy one, right? Across pretty much the board with all of our customers. If you're using Databricks today, Genie Ontology is pretty much going to make things just work a lot better. And so that is an obvious one that everybody kind of needs to be, continuing to kind of grow their, own understanding around. But I think outside of that is find the thing that is most appropriate and then also bring that to customers, right? We always think there's no point in us keeping a load of information, a load of knowledge to ourselves, right? The only benefit that you get of having, one of the benefits of having a company like ours involved in, your business is that we love to share what we do. We love to share what we learn. And we have to really think about how that applies to what you do. If that's through like lunch and learns, if that's through hackathons, whatever it might be. The thing that I ask the team is, find an interesting opportunity or an interesting angle where one of the 30 plus announcements is really impactful to your customer, and then kick the idea around with them, right? And see if it can be something that we can bring to them, to go faster, to help them achieve, an outcome quicker, to save money as well, right? Because there's a ton of stuff in there, which is, decent cost saving opportunities for a customer. So it's find the right thing in the right domain and the right context for a customer that we can really bring a targeted solution that just makes their lives much easier. And so that's my general ask, across the board is find the thing that makes people's lives easier.
I think that's a good note to finish off on is find something that makes people's lives easier. And isn't that what we all want to do?
Damn right.
Thank you very much, Terry. That's fantastic.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to see many, many more episodes of this show.
Well, more to come, and I will leave you there. Thank you very much, Terry. We'll see you soon. That's all for now. A huge thank you to Terry for joining us and for sharing your thoughts on what has been, by any measure, a pretty remarkable time for the data and AI industry. If you've enjoyed today's episode, then please do follow us and share it with anyone in your network who's navigating the world of data and AI. And if you've thoughts on anything we've discussed today, whether that's Genie, Omnigent, Lakehouse RT, or anything else, we'd love to hear from you. From all of us here at Advancing Analytics, thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next one. The Data Hot Seat.